is still going on today. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual doom. And, I agree with Chuck. And, 2018, and, we're closing down schools, they're closing down parks. We're still going through the same thing. But, as a youngster, I've always had a chance, especially now being older and professional, I've always had a chance to, thank my, professional heroes that came before me. Ali, I've met Ali, the great Bill Russell, Kareem. I wish I'd had a chance to meet Dr. Martin Luther King, because, he's done so much. And if it wasn't for him and his family and, Malcolm X, the struggles that they went through, we wouldn't be here today.
You know what's ironic about my life, Kenny's life, Shaq's life, Ernie? Man, sports, sports is the most amazing thing in the world. Sports has given me every single thing in my life. But the number one thing that sports has given me is we still live in a segregated country. Like when I'm in Alabama, and one side of town's the black, the other side of town's the white, and that's sad. That shouldn't happen. But sports, it's the first time I ever got to spend time, like quality time around white people. And one of my best friends in the world is a guy named Pep Mark. I love him like a brother. He invited me to his house. It was the first time I had been to the white side of town. And my mom says, "What do you think?" I says, "What do you mean, what do I think?" She says, "You're going on the other side of town." I said, "Mom, Pep is a great guy. His mom and dad are great people." She said, "Go ahead and have fun." And this guy, but that was my first time coming out of my comfort zone. And I've always told Pep this, I love him like a brother, but the number one thing he did for me, he gave me a peace of mind that all this stuff that you're watching on television, it's always going to exist. We're always going to have racism. Like I say, we're still arguing about the same crap 54 years later. But I try to always look at the good, man. Yeah. And Kenny, he said this, you talked about that before also.
Yeah, that's the first time I hugged someone of another race was through sports. But I also think that it's generational now in 2018. It's also social and economic. Because the social and economic climate believes that because someone isn't as wealthy or as affluent as you, that they might not, and they might be of a particular color, that they're not as equal to you now, socially and economically. So it is not just, I think, in the 60s, and even it was just black, white, and it was very specific. And I think now it's becoming very socio-economic along with race.
And I think we need the words, we need the dream, we need the actions of Dr. King as much now as we ever had.
And I want to give a shout out to the NBA, Ernie, because what they do for this special day, because obviously the majority of our players are black. What David Stern started and Adam Silver continues to do, us making a big deal out of this holiday. Shout out to the NBA.
As we reflect on the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement today, Isaiah Thomas got the unique perspective of Dr. King's daughter, Dr. Bernice King, as well as the daughter of Malcolm X, Ambassador Atala Shabazz, on how they remember their fathers.
Well, as I sit here with Dr. Bernice King, Ambassador Shabazz, the royal family of the civil rights movement, your parents were the role models for a generation of black men and black women. My mom and my dad was emulating your dad and your mom in terms of how I was raised. And I want to thank you for that.
First, let me say thank you for acknowledging our parents. They were young people, young individuals, and no new day was promised for them, as we know how they concluded. They were raising families and trying to keep us away from fear, but preserving the dignity and the purpose for life.
I believe my father was a prophet to the world. I think he left us with some important teachings that are necessary and essential, and we're going to be forced at some point to really start looking at embracing.
Our fathers are not accident in the way they led, the way they journeyed, the way they evolved, the way they understood, the way they served, the way they gave, the way they gifted. They believed it. But at the end of the day, you actually know that whisper that affirms that we are indeed part of the human family.
History doesn't really tell us how connected your families were.
They disconnect our families
Yes.
in the telling of history.
They only met on one occasion.
Well, no, but they communicated. So this is the thing: it's always documented they met on one occasion as if there was as if it was a hit and a run.
Right.
People
Yeah.
don't realize that my father went down to Washington and he said, "Make sure Martin knows I'm here."
Yeah.
Because to have walked out would have been polarizing.
Yeah.
It's become so the intentionality. Right? Very specific, because this is not about me.
Yeah, and
this
they-
is
and
about
they
how that message gets, if it's going to
Yeah.
work.
Yes.
There was a relationship that sometimes even their own respective factions may not have wanted to blur, because we do that too. But they understood one another, and they were both at places where the plural mattered. That's the stuff people don't know about.
Yeah.
And then when I met this little one,
You still
She has years on me, so she knows things I don't know. I used to tell people all the time, when I would do interviews with my siblings, I kind of just sat there because, I was the 5-year-old on my mom's lap. I missed most of those years where a lot of this stuff was happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with your moms, you have two strong women who have lost their soulmates. How was it living in a household with strong mothers like that?
But it takes someone to carry your legacy forward, and she was that person. And so when we remember and think about Dr. King, his greatness and all that he did, and even the access we have to certain things about him, and the way in which we remember him, she's really the architect of all of that, and doesn't get enough credit. We forget that. It's like this wonderful man. And the reason he could keep going.
Yeah.
that's the
They held them up. They held their husbands up, and their husbands knew it.
I'm sure there's got to be some private moments that you just want to yourself. How do you balance this moment with yourself, family, and the world at large?
Coming upon this 50th anniversary has been hard for me.
Yeah.
I've cried. Things are coming up more for me emotionally that perhaps were buried prior to. I'll be frank, there are times when I'm like, I don't like sharing this. I feel sometimes that, wow, everybody, quote unquote, gets to co-opt the moment.
Yeah.
And where am I in all of this? Because I was that little girl. And I can't remember anything about what happened on April 4th. Nothing.
Yeah.
I can remember April 9th, the funeral, because it was hot. There were a lot of lights. And I remember his voice being played. And because my mother had told me prior to, in preparing me, that when you see your father, he's not going to be able to speak to you anymore. He's gone to live with God. So when they played the voice, you told me he wouldn't be able to speak. So this little girl knew her father's voice. I'm looking for him. I'm confused, like he can't, but he's speaking. Where is he? And so, for me, it's a very emotional time period. Every year we go through it. Yeah. But for some reason, because I'm having to be more focused this 50th year, it's now forced me to face that time period.
If there's any families that should be hateful, both of your families deserve that. But still, there's a unity, there's a coming together, there's a wanting to extend. And I ask you, why?
I know for me, when you get to experience what goes around, comes around. I've also lived long enough to see the good come around. I've lived long enough to see patience come around, the value or the result of patience, enabling people to grow at their own pace with understanding, and being glad that I didn't say something in advance to have stained that trajectory.
Yeah.
I went through a season where I hated.
Yeah.
And I had to deal with that for a long time. It took some time. And I now realize the value of and the power of unconditional love and the importance of it. to humanity.
How can athletes join your movement and use their platforms in terms of activism today?
The way in which it's being done today is less of a threat than if there was a true alliance in joining. And so if that's something they really are heart and soul committed to, they have to be prepared to pay the price.
How would your father like to see this day remembered?
It's more than a day. It's the journey, it's the process, it's the commitment. We do this every year, and I always say, how can we just push people further? I'm gonna learn how to love people that hate me. I'm going to learn how to speak truth in a way that doesn't denigrate. I'm gonna learn how to hear and understand. I think this day ought to always represent love for humanity.
Conversation orchestrated as a Hall of Fame point guard would orchestrate it. Well done, Isaiah, for that. Other tweets that we're seeing. Pau Gasol, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter, as he again quotes Dr. King. As Mello says, progress will always be uncomfortable and noisy. And even all these years later, his words still ring true, especially in today's climate. Thoughts of Reggie Miller on this MLK Day, 2018. And we welcome you back to Studio J here in Atlanta. Well, Dr. King was born here in Atlanta in 1929. His life ended 39 years later in Memphis, Tennessee, where you will find the National Civil Rights Museum. Our Hall of Fame reporter David Aldridge went to Memphis, where he sat down with NBA Commissioner Adam Silver and Michelle Roberts, the executive director of the National Basketball Players Association, to discuss the lasting impact and legacy of Dr. King.
This game, this weekend has always been very important, to Memphis. Jason Wexler said it's our Super Bowl, basically. Is it especially poignant, or is it especially correct for the NBA of all leagues to understand the history of this place and this city, to have a team here, and to also really embrace all that this museum brings out in terms of people and their emotions and the history that's here?
I remember years ago some people said, maybe you guys shouldn't be playing on Martin Luther King Day. You know, it's like a lot of people have the day off. It's a holiday for a lot of people. And I think we ultimately came together and said, well, we can inspire people by playing today and by making it into something bigger than the game. Mm-hmm. And I think it was ultimately a collective decision that this is a terrific opportunity to educate people about the values that are important to this league.
Obviously, not a single one of our current players was alive when Dr. King was killed. And what warms my heart is they all either understand or want to understand more about what the legacy was. And so I can't even imagine that the NBA would not be embracing this holiday in the way we do, and it just stands to reason that we would.
Dr. King, towards the end of his life, he was expanding beyond civil rights to human rights. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also something we're particularly proud of, that we have a league that is majority African-American, but it's very diverse in terms of ethnicity and nationalities. Mm-hmm. Close to a quarter of our league is born outside the United States now, and I think, and other important societal issues that this league has come to stand for. So the message is as relevant, if it's possibly more relevant at this moment in time than ever before in our history.
When I went on the balcony, I started sobbing. So I wonder what that experience was like for you all today.
I think I'm glad it was really cold out there, because I was stunned. And part of me thought there's something grotesque about being out here. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of me thought, it's an interesting way to say goodbye and hello.
There's a marker on the pavement or the cement bottom part of the balcony where they show, and that's where he fell. And it's incredibly moving. It's a fascinating mixture of, here we are at the Lorraine Hotel, the actual hotel we were staying, but then a lot of very modern, interactive displays combined with it. It's a remarkable place to come visit.
Do you believe that the times that we live in, and I'll just leave it at that, provide an opportunity for even more kind of joint appearances, joint programs between the league and the players to present an even more unified front than you already do?
I think the answer is absolutely yes. Adam, I hate to compliment you too often. I don't want you to get carried away, but to the extent we have a commissioner and a league that rather than tries to suppress, but instead appreciates and is supportive, works well for me, because I do see that our population, our player population, is not going to ignore some of the events in our communities, but instead want to make a difference. They are woke. So as long as there's a need for people to be engaged, I don't think that we can expect our players to ignore that need.
And I'll just add, we're not just friends on TV, but I mean, to your question, I do think the symbolism does become important.
It does seem to me that the NBA has this group of players, both of color and from other countries, and a collection of wealth that probably doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth, right? I mean,
probably right.
It just probably doesn't, right? So does that create an obligation even beyond what they're doing now?
Whether there's an obligation or not is almost irrelevant, because the reality is that our guys and our gals are doers, and they're doing something, and maybe because of some sense of obligation. And then there may be others, maybe people in the audience who are saying, well, they should be doing that, they're wealthy. It's completely irrelevant that they are. And they're doing it because they believe in it, without me or Adam or anyone else telling them that they have a responsibility to their communities. They're just acting.
It's part of the DNA of being a player in this league, and it's what Bill Russell and Oscar and others created from years ago, and that gets passed down. But I think that this enterprise, this economic engine that is the league, provides for a lot of lives, and I think that's something that we're both very proud of. And I think, talk about an obligation, I think that's why even when we sit in collective bargaining, I think we always feel that weight of responsibility, that it's not just about the players on the floor, it's not just about the managing partners of the teams, it's about this larger NBA community.
When you watch that and you hear from Michelle and Adam, what is the league's role in this, in a larger perspective, from a social perspective?
I think, as an example, be exemplary. I think that is, again, with the large number of players that are African American, but it's really about a human right. But then the economic power that not just the league has, but the individual players now have. So there's a bigger responsibility because of their economic potential that they have collectively or singularly. Salaries when we were playing, for a guy like, $2.5 million, $3 million, that was a big deal. A guy would sneeze at that kind of money this year in this.
That's the minimum wage now.
That's the minimum. Those were the best players in the league, and now that's the worst players in the league. So, guys are making 15, 20 million. So the responsibility and economic empowerment that they can actually possess, that's what I'm not sure they know yet, because it's new to them as well. And at 23, I'm not sure if I would know, or 24. And that's why it's important to kind of, especially, I think you, Shaq, because you have the economic power that they've had for a long time. And you've been able to display it in a lot of different areas and kind of showing them how to do that. And, Charles has made a great deal of money. I've made a great deal of money, but not even to you guys, but nothing like what you have understood and what that really means in your community and as a responsibility and as a black man.
Even before I played in the NBA, they've always done a great job of being committed, especially on this day. They do a lot of things in the community, and they've done a great job. You have to, start off with David Stern and Adam Silver's doing a great job. But, Dr. King's daughter said something very important. So if you're going to talk about certain issues, just be committed. Be committed full, because it's a full-time job. It was full-time for Malcolm X. It was full-time for Dr. King. It's full-time for every other leader that's, trying to make a difference in our community. So that's my advice to all the players.
I do like what Carmelo and
let me just say one thing, though. It's interesting this year in sports, and you got the President of the United States insulting them NFL players who are having peaceful protests. And can you imagine somebody, and Dr. King only believed in peaceful protests. The notion that it's bad to peaceful protest, that the only other protest is violent protest. So, but for the president to criticize them NFL players for having a peaceful protest, and if people would criticize Dr. King for having a peaceful protest, that's how far we still have to go.
I love the quote, everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love.
What? Hey, okay. Naruto, Nine-Tail, Fox, I feel like a Gucci ad-lib. Burr, go to the Coca-Cola, mascot, polo bird. Put my salsa lasagna, it can make Garfield burr.